Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you are watching The World Report. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. One person is killed and 10 others are injured after Russian missiles and drones hit Kiev overnight, according to the city's military administration. Officials say windows were shattered, cars damaged and a crater left in the courtyard of a residential building. Kirill Dmitriev, the Russian president's special envoy, says that Russia, the United States and Ukraine are close to reaching a diplomatic solution to end the war in Ukraine. Speaking to CNN after arriving in Washington for talks with US officials, he said that a Trump-Putin meeting had not been cancelled but merely moved to a later date. US and Chinese officials start talks in the Malaysian capital of Kuala Lumpur on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit to discuss a trade deal prior to a face-to-face meeting with their respective presidents later this week. This comes as the US president threatens Beijing with a new 100% tariff and China puts restrictions on rare earth minerals. The US military is flying drones over Gaza to monitor the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. That's according to the New York Times. The surveillance flights approved by Israel aim to give Washington an independent view of developments on the ground through a new joint coordination center. US President Donald Trump says he's open to meeting North Korean leader Kim Jong-un while in South Korea, adding they get along very well. He also confirms plans to meet Brazil's President Lula da Silva at an ASEAN summit in Malaysia, saying tariff talks could be on the table under the right circumstances. The United States has imposed sanctions on Colombian President Gustavo Petro over accusations that Bogotá has failed to stop the flow of cocaine into the United States. Trump has previously called Petro an illegal drug leader, a claim that the Colombian president strongly denies. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has accused the United States of fabricating war after it sent the world's largest warship towards the Caribbean in a major escalation of its military buildup in the region. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered the USS General R. Ford aircraft carrier to move to the Mediterranean last night. The United States has struck another vessel in the Caribbean, killing 6 people it labels as narco-terrorists, the US Defense Secretary has said. While Hegseth did not provide any evidence of what the vessel was carrying, a video was published on social media and the Defense Secretary stated that the vessel was operated by the Tren de Agua gang. Now this hour we start in Europe, where according to a UK news agency, 154 convicted Hamas terrorists released by Israel under the recent Gaza ceasefire deal are currently staying at the 5-star hotel in Egypt. Undercover journalists stayed at the hotel. Among the men that included senior Hamas commanders, ISIS affiliates and convicted bombers. The report says that the former prisoners are living in luxury alongside unsuspecting Western tourists, with some expected to be relocated soon to countries such as Qatar, Turkey and Tunisia. Security experts have warned that allowing these extremists to regroup abroad could pose a renewed global terror threat. The Marriott Hotel Group has not commented on the claims. Meanwhile, the Israeli government said the releases were necessary to secure the freedom of the last remaining hostages in Gaza. We are now joined by Saul Sadka. He's a security analyst and author, and he joins us live from Tel Aviv to discuss this further. Thank you very much, Saul, for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you. I was just wondering, first of all, on your thoughts on this story. Of course, This comes from a news agency in the UK. The location and purpose are not fully transparent, as we know. And of course, these claims cannot be verified by this news channel. However, the broader implications of some of the sacrifices that Israel, of course, made for the Gaza ceasefire, some of which of the prisoners which Israel released were serving life sentences in Israeli prison for terrorism, in order to release those Israel hostages. How does that feed into the longevity of Donald Trump's plan for peace in the Middle East, given that now these prisoners, some that were arrested for terrorism, are now free to roam the region?
Interesting question. Thank you for having me on. I would say that an additional few hundred terrorists, which will be in the Middle East or perhaps even in Europe, is a drop in the bucket to the number of active jihadis who are already currently there. In the UK alone, there are approximately 40,000 suspected jihadis on watch lists, just in the UK. So you're talking around Europe, must be 500,000, with perhaps another 500,000 in Muslim countries and Arab countries around the Middle East region. So a couple of hundred here or there spread around are not posing any particular additional threat, although these are, some of them, battle-hardened, others of them are murderers with blood on their hands. Yet, as you can see, it's really insignificant in terms of the number in total. These all have to be monitored going forward by the local authorities, wherever they will be. The main problem regarding what you asked about Trump's plan is that we have now finished stage one, more or less, right? There's still 13 Israeli bodies held by Hamas, which they're dripping out, and we'll see if that ever comes to an end, or if they will continue to hold on to a few. But even if that is done, stage two of Trump's plan is predicated on Hamas handing over their weapons. And the likelihood of that happening voluntarily is very low. Now, if Hamas don't hand over their weapons, we end up in this permanent limbo stage, which is perfectly fine for Israel and not so much for the Gazan people. And you would imagine also that Donald Trump and his people will also be somewhat disappointed by the fact that their plan is being thwarted by Hamas. And yet I'm not sure that anyone, apart from perhaps the people of Gaza, are going to be disappointed enough with continued Hamas rule over 40% of Gaza that they now control to go in there and fight to get them out. The only people that were previously motivated to do that were, of course, the Israelis, and that was only because the Hamas terrorists were holding on to 20 living hostages and an additional 30 bodies. Remains to be seen if there can be found anyone in the world or any coalition of people willing to disarm Hamas, and that can only be done by force.
Okay, Sol, do stay with us as we have some further related developments, this time coming out of the United Nations, where the Agency for Palestinian Refugees has warned of an urgent humanitarian crisis in Gaza ahead of the approaching winter. The UN agency has said that displaced families in the Gaza Strip can face cold temperatures and heavy rainstorms in the coming weeks, with many in desperate need of shelter and supplies. In a recent social media post on X, the UN agency has stressed that crucial winter materials are stored in warehouses in Jordan and Egypt, but they remain blocked from entering Gaza. Access for humanitarian organizations has long been restricted by Israel, including a ban on UNRWA's participation in relief operations. In other developments, the UN Security Council met on Thursday to discuss the situation in Gaza. Israel and Hamas have reiterated their commitment to the US-mediated ceasefire despite allegations of violations, since it took effect on October the 10th. The deal has so far enabled the release of some Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, the handover of bodies, and also a partial Israeli troop pullback. Okay, Saul joins us once again. Of course, some would argue that we're about 12 days into this ceasefire now. You said phase one is pretty much done, but many critics have said that phase one agreed on the unrestricted flow of aid into the Gaza Strip. Now, on average, 98 trucks have been entering the Gaza Strip per day. Now, the agreed amount was 600, Sol. Now, with the Gaza winter slowly encroaching, the United Nations is saying that these Gazans who now are returning to their homes, 80% of which are decimated to rubble, they will be very much ill-equipped for the winter. Who bears responsibility for that?
The fact that a large proportion of the homes in Gaza are currently destroyed, perhaps 70%, is entirely the responsibility of the groups who rigged them with booby traps, tunneled underneath them, and fired rockets out of them. I think everyone would agree on that. Of course, once you booby trap a house, you have destroyed that house. You haven't destroyed the house when you actually trigger the booby trap. You destroy the house when you plant the booby trap.
Okay, but so what I'm asking is, why isn't the full, as agreed upon, unrestricted aid, the 600 trucks a day, being allowed into the Gaza Strip in order so the displaced population of Gaza can be fully equipped for the upcoming winter months?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I haven't seen the details. I know if you look on the X account of COGAT, C-O-G-A-T, they provide the updated and correct numbers of trucks that are getting in. There are no shortages of any kind of basic necessities, such as food or anything like that in Gaza at the moment. There are plenty of videos that you can find that show restaurants reopening, people having parties. Life is returning to normal in the parts of Gaza that remain relatively untouched, and even within the newly founded refugee camps, the tent cities, where the people who have lost their homes are living. They have no shortage of food. They have no shortage of brand new iPhones, which are available for sale. Whether or not, it is indeed extremely upsetting, and I can imagine how awful it must be that the Gazans are now heading, a lot of them, into their third winter living in tents. And unfortunately, due to the level of destruction, which just the demolition work and the clearing of the land alone is estimated to be will have to take at least 15 years to clear the land to allow rebuilding. This is going to be the third winter of perhaps many winters for many of these people. But all of this rests on the heads of the people who started the war, who invaded Israel 2 years ago for no purpose. They had no chance of winning. Their plan was to simply murder people and take hostages.
So there is a ceasefire now, and the agreement, which US President Donald Trump has said that there should be unrestricted aid flow into the Gaza Strip. And I think what UNRWA is saying is that it is unable still, given that line has been signed, is that it's unable to deliver those blankets and those necessities to those people, that they can, those people in need can access those goods for those.
I fully encourage any requirements that should be fulfilled. I don't know exactly what the details are. I would say that UNRWA are totally unreliable as a source of information. They were themselves complicit in the attacks on October 7th. They educated 2 generations of Gazans into essentially full-on Nazi propaganda, and many, if not most, of the people who attacked Israel and all the Hamas members were educated in UNRWA schools, and they have been shown time and time again over the course of the war to be using false statistics. I don't know if that's true. In any case, Gazans should be given all the aid that is required. Trump himself actually yesterday came out, I think it was Rubio, his Secretary of State, who said absolutely no chance that UNRWA has any future in participating in rebuilding Gaza. Nobody wants UNRWA involved, no one's serious. They were part of the problem, they won't be part of the solution, I would say.
Okay, Saul Sadka, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Pleasure to speak to you. We will, of course, here on NewsX World, continue to bring you all the updates as that ceasefire plan flows through the stages. We now move on over to South America next, where Colombian President Gustavo Petro has issued a response after the United States imposed sanctions on him, his family and senior officials. While addressing a large crowd in Bogotá's Bolivia Square, Petro declared that they do not kneel and will not take a step back. The US Treasury blacklisted the president, First Lady Veronica Acosta, his son Nicolas and Interior Minister Almedo Benedetti, freezing any assets they hold in the United States and banning them from travel. Petro dismissed the sanctions, saying he has no money or business ties in the US and accused Washington of undermining Colombia's sovereignty. Let's in fact listen in to some of the Colombian president's statements.
Nosotros no nos arrodillamos. Nosotros no vamos a dar un paso atrás. Este país ni siquiera sabe con claridad en dónde queda Colombia. ¿Quién subió los cultivos de hoja de coca en este país y quién los ha detenido? ¿Quién ha librado una lucha contra las mafias del narcotráfico colombiano en su pretensión de tomarse el poder? ¿Y quién ha gobernado? No tengo $1 en los Estados Unidos. No hay ninguna cuenta que congelarme. No tengo ni ganas ni nunca en el futuro de hacer negocios en los Estados Unidos de Norteamérica.
We now move on once again, and US President Donald Trump has commented, saying that North Korea is, quote, sort of a nuclear power. He made these remarks as he left the United States for his Asia tour. Trump indicates that North Korea possesses a large arsenal of nuclear weapons when asked about recognizing it as a nuclear power. The US president is expected in South Korea on Wednesday for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum. And meanwhile, a senior US official says that Trump will not meet the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un during his South Korea visit, though he remains open to future talks. The US media have previously reported officials from his administration that have privately discussed setting up for a meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un, who he last spoke to in 2019. We're now joined by Dr. Sanjay Kumar. He's a journalist at the Korea Herald, and he joins us live from Seoul in South Korea. Dr. Kumar, pleasure to speak to you. Let's first get on with that statement that he has made today. Obviously, Donald Trump famously called Kim Jong-un a rocket man at his United Nations address in his first term. Donald Trump reiterating that statement. Often Kim Jong-un is associated with rockets and missiles and weaponry, big parades down the streets of Pyongyang, sort of a nuclear power. Is Donald Trump accurate in his descriptions there?
Thomas, first of all, thank you very much for having me. And we have to understand the legal context of what President Trump has said today. When he says a sort of a nuclear country, state, that does not mean that United Nations or US is recognizing the nuclear potential of North Korea. In conversational words, we use such sort of expressions. So it's very much a conversational style of President Trump. It should be seen in that way. And there is a legal logic behind it as well, because in 2003, North Korea already, declined to agree with the NPT, and it does not recognize North Korea also as a nuclear power state. So this legal context is not here in this President Trump's citing right now. And also, it should not be forgotten that in 2006, United Nations have issued sanctions against North Korea as well. So I'm not going to discuss from the negative angle, but what is positive here is President Trump's efforts of personal diplomacy that he's trying to forge with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. So it should be seen in that way right now. And as you know, President Trump is going to attend the APEC meeting. Just this morning, we also came to know in South Korea that there is a possible President Trump and President Xi of China's meeting. Also, the South Korean President Lee Jae-myung is to meet President Trump as well. So a lot of euphoric things are happening. And we should also recall the Trump and Lee Jae-myung's meeting when Lee Jae-myung cited President Trump as peacemaker, and he also showcased his commitment of playing a role of pacemaker. So this peacemaker and pacemaker, from that perspective, I think there is something to be positive. But if you ask me frankly from North Korea's perspective, I do not see any substantial reason to just come to Gyeongju for APEC. But if we want to be under wishful thinking, maybe North Korea's Kim Jong-un can come towards Panmunjom and he can just say hi. But this is again very, very much wishful and very, very hopeful, I think, approach. Yeah.
Yes, and Dr. Kumar, there seems to be a bit of an appetite from South Korea's leader for, of course, peace in the Korean peninsula between the North and the South. Do you think Donald Trump can help facilitate that, especially given the seemingly like for one another between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un?
Yes, that kind of Trump's personal diplomacy can help here in South Korea in creating a positive and, in minimizing, mitigating the tensions between the two Koreas. And especially under South Korean President Lee Jae-myung's pragmatic approach under the umbrella of this peaceful coexistence kind of policy that he wants to forge with North Korea. And recently he has even mentioned during his interview with CNN that he is ready to, not confront, but to somehow agree with some of the, nuisance, we should say, and the aggressive behavior and aggressive approach of North Korea. So South Korea had been tolerating, and President Lee Jae-myung was trying to justify that, yes, for a peaceful inter-Korean relations, we have to, South Korea has to tolerate sometimes some things. Although, this is creating different kinds of political debates domestically, but for a peaceful coexistence approach to be working, this kind of personal diplomacy has no harm, and it is good for the health of inter-Korean relations.
Dr. Kumar, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us. We now move on over to Southeast Asia, where Vietnam's lawmaking body, Vietnam's National Assembly, has confirmed the appointment of the 2 new deputy prime ministers and 3 ministers. The additional deputy prime ministers include former Minister of Home Affairs Tham Thi Than Tra and former Communist Party chief of Gia Lai Province, Ho Kok Dong. This has raised the number of deputy prime ministers in the country's government to 9. The Assembly also confirmed the appointments of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs, Agriculture and Home Affairs. The Vietnam's National Assembly began its final session of the year on Monday, which will last until December the 11th. Well, that is all that we have time for. Keep tuned on NewsX World for more international news updates.